We're here because of a river, and not just any river. She spans a continent and with her tributaries forms one of the great river basins of the world. New Orleans was founded where it is because of that great river, and in time she became a magnet, attracting to her commerce and people, trade, industry, for working and for living. Around the Queen City of the Mississippi grew other smaller communities, each with its own unique blend of people, each with its own reason for being, each with its own history. In time, the legislature would call her Jefferson Parish, but she would always think of herself as the Free State of Jefferson, a community as storied, as lively, and as interesting as her more famous sister, New Orleans. A community is not formed by political considerations, not by lines drawn on a map. It is rather the mixing and mingling of people that in time produces a community, the daily living together that changes a place into a home. Welcome to Jefferson Genesis, the story of our community.
This is about the most peaceful and serene I've felt in 16 years, which is oddly enough the last time I was sitting here on your dock.
Was that party?
It was that party when your son had all the members of the Jefferson Parish players, the first group of Jefferson Parish players out here.
That was the first group.
It was.
I was also part of the first Jefferson Parish school band they ever had.
You were?
Yeah, I got a picture of it.
When was that?
That was 1935, I think, or 36. Dr. Edwards was the band director, and had 5 or 6 from Gretna High, 5 or 6 from Westwego, from Kenner, from Jefferson, and from Metairie.
You used to come from down here in the Lafitte Crown Point area to Gretna for school?
Yeah, we went to...
How'd you get there?
They had one school bus. That was #1 bus. It's still in existence here in the Lafitte area.
It's not still carrying students, is it?
Not the same bus. But, I mean, it was designated, it was the first bus they ever had in Jefferson Parish. Mr. Eddie Adams was the driver, and he drove the kids from Lafitte to Gretna High School every day.
How long have you been on the bayou?
We moved on the bayou in December 13th of 1921. And I was born in 1920.
So I was 1 year old?
A year and a month old when we moved on the bayou.
You've been here ever since?
First we lived at a little house down about a half a mile down there. We lived there for a short period of time till we bought this property. And I've been living here ever since, with the exception of 6 years I put in the Navy during World War II.
This wasn't the Intracoastal Canal?
No, it was just little Bayou Barataria at that time, and we had a wharf, and you could dive overboard and swim almost all the way across underwater. That's how narrow it was.
I wouldn't like to try that today.
At that time, it was just a little natural bayou, and shrimp boats, an occasional stern wheeler, and freight boat passed through. In fact, it didn't even have a road here at first. We had to go and come by boat. And the mail and everything else went by boat.
You had a mail boat come by?
Oh yeah, the mail boat used to make, I don't know how many, 2 or 3 trips a week to Grand Island. And of course they stopped and left the mail at the post offices.
Where did it come from? From Gretna?
From Harvey Canal.
They just work its way down the bayou to Grand Island?
From Harvey all the way through here, all the way to Grand Island.
What was it like growing up here?
Wonderful, wonderful. It was a hard life, but having lost my father when I was 6 years old, but we worked hard, we made a garden. Mama was a tough taskmaster. We had our work to do before we ever played.
I think all mamas were back in the old days anyway.
But we hunted and we fished and we had a good life. Worst part about it was having to go to school. miss out on that good fun, you know. But it was great living down here. I wouldn't take anything for it.
I guess one thing we associate Lafitte with is, you know, hunting, fishing,
Hunting and
trapping.
fishing. That's why we never could get a good football team. The kids didn't want to stay in practice in the summer. They wanted to go fishing and trawling and all, you know.
Well, that was the way people lived in South Louisiana. That's where my dad grew up.
That was our lifestyle. That was it. I couldn't never practice sports or anything at Gretna High School because I had to catch that bus home in the evening. Because if I had to stay in practice, then I'd have to hitchhike or get home the best way I could or stay at somebody's house in Gretna, you see. Which I did do when I had play in the band or we played any concerts or anything. Well, there was some friends that I'd stay with in Gretna, the Heptings or the Wagners. And but that's the only thing I ever participated in high school was track meet because I could run on my own, you see. Mm-hmm. And I ran a mile run one year. Came out something like 4th or 5th because we didn't know how to pace ourselves or anything else. All we knew how to do was run. And that's just like baseball. The only thing I ever played was just
Sandlot.
No sand here. Was mosquitoes and grass.
You either hit the ball or the mosquitoes, depends on what you
Many
wanted.
of the time you'd be standing out there in the outfield and beating mosquitoes and the ball would go over your head. But it was great living there. It still is great.
What kind of people? What was the people like?
Well, when we moved here, the majority of people were French. You know, I guess our family was one of the few in this area right here that didn't speak French. Because my father and mother were both from Florida. I was born in Mississippi. And but we learned to speak the French with the kids, and then later working with the people who spoke French and all. I can speak better French than my wife, and she's Frenchman. But I would speak French more often, but now it's fading away. Not as many people speak French anymore.
You used to be a big pierog racer, didn't you?
I was in the pierog race in 1938.
Is that the big event still in Lafitte?
Not no more.
No?
I haven't had it in 2 years.
That's a shame. That was a great tradition.
It was a great tradition. It was a great race, and it used to be exceptionally great when they had it started down there near the tavern and came all the way up to Fleming's Plantation. So it was a 4-mile straight course. Then they had some difficulty with the Fleming family, and it wasn't the Fleming's fault. But they decided to change it and have it down at Lafitte, where the tavern. And then that's when they started running courses for, down and back and down and back. And that worked out fine, though it still attracted terrific crowds. But then they moved it up here, and they raced down here under this bridge. And the crowds...
Got to be too touristy, huh?
And not only that, with the intercoastal traffic and all. And you had no place to view it except right at the Rosethorn Park. And it just went down and down, and the management affected it too.
Did you build your own pierog when you were racing?
Yes. Me and a friend up the road who was the town drunk.
Oh, we won't mention his name then.
No. Many of the days he'd be laying on the ground half loaded, and I'd be planing and shaving wood off of the thing, and he'd be half covered up with shaving.
Well, he was keeping warm
didn't even
anyway.
notice it. But he was the best old soul in the world when he was sober. We went up the bayou about 4 miles, almost to Harvard Canal, and went back in a swamp about, I guess about 5 or 6 blocks. Found this log, and we hewed it out roughly, and drug it there in the coastal, and then pulled it home. And it took nearly a year, going to school and everything else.
And just kind of all by hand?
By hand, every bit by hand. dug it out and planed it with put adze and with a plane. And it was 18 feet long, 15 inches wide, and 6 inches deep.
15 inches wide, 6 inches deep.
I was narrower then than I am now. But I could paddle pretty good.
That's the whole trick with the pierog, isn't it? You got to know how to paddle it, because with just that much...
especially a racing pierog, it's like a needle. If you shift your gum to one side or the other, you'd turn over. But I sunk twice in the race itself. But it wasn't because I turned over. My boat filled up with water, and you had to bail it out and get back in without going ashore. And I sunk about midway of the course, and then I sunk as I come across the finishing line. I sunk again.
Were pierogs just invented down here to make use of the cypress trees, or?
Evidently, this was a combination of from the Indian and Cajun that perfected the pierog, because in those days the cypress trees were plentiful, big enough, you know. Lord, some of them were big enough you could split them in half and make 2 pierogs, you know. And in fact, we had one dug out of the bayou that we made 2 pierogs with. I didn't make that pierog though, Mr. Tony Capel made it. But we gave him one half of the log to make a pierog for himself, and he made one for us with the other half. And a good cypress pierog was like having a Cadillac automobile.
Yeah, they're a work of art, really.
Because you could go in the marshes, you could go anywhere with them. And it was said you could go in a heavy dew with a good pierog. And then your living was made with them. You know, the trappers all had to have them.
Sure.
And fishermen, and you could just take your little fishing line and paddle up the stump anywhere along here and pull out 3 or 4 dozen perch big as your hand, or green trout either. And everything was so plentiful back in those days.
What's it like now?
Seafood and all. Well, right now in this bayou, about the only thing you can catch is catfish occasionally.
Because of all the intercoastal
Too
traffic?
much traffic, yeah, boat traffic. The concussion from those propellers are terrific. And the suction, and the water stays disturbed. And then most of the time we have 90% of the water is Mississippi River water, because you have 2 locks up here, Harvey Lock and the Belchester locks, and when that river's high, that puts so much river water through here. And but it's a blessing too, because when it silts up and fills up, the government comes along and dredges it out and pumps it back in what used to be a swamp, and made all high land for us back there, you see. So.
Well, you can still swim in here, can't you?
Oh,
we
yeah.
did 16 years ago at that party, I remember.
Yeah, I still go in every day. I got my ladder right there. That's my bathtub. It's less trouble than waiting for the hot water to run, you know. And
I want to go back to school. Tell me about some of the people when you were going to school. Where'd you go to school?
Gretna High School. You mean the people from here that went to school up there?
Well, both. Yeah, I'm interested in the school too.
Gretna High School, Helen Cox was our principal.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that earlier. That's quite a lady on the West Bank education.
Yeah, she is. They should have a monument made to her. Really, she was great. And Miss Worley was principal of Westwego High. She was a wonderful person too.
Well, they both have monuments in a way. They have schools named for them.
Some of the teachers that taught me in Gretna High later moved on up the ladder. Well, Lem Higgins was one of the first school superintendents that I can remember after Mr. Ellis. Mr. Ellis was way back in the early 30s.
Yeah, he retired, I think, in 1940.
Yeah. No, not...
Didn't J.C. Ellis retire in 1940?
Oh, no. J.C. Ellis was one of the older men. I think he died while he was still school superintendent.
Okay, well, we did a program on the history of the
Now, Lem
school
Higgins
system.
is probably...
Well, Lem Higgins passed
60.
away my first year of teaching in about 63.
Is that late?
Yeah.
Well, I know first J.C. Ellis was the first one I remember, then Lem Higgins, and then Peter Bertuzzi was superintendent.
Who was one of your teachers, wasn't he?
Yes. Paul Solis from Westwego was superintendent now. He was a fine man. He was decorated in the war and all.
You know, he never taught you, though.
No,
He was at
no.
Westwego his whole
I
career.
knew him well. I think he taught my wife in Westwego.
Yeah.
But Joe Martino, who later was principal of West Jefferson.
My first principal when I
yeah,
started teaching. Yeah.
Yeah, he was my 8th grade general science teacher.
What kind of teacher was he?
Tough.
He was a tough principal,
He
too.
was tough. He was that way, no nonsense. No, he was tough. I knew him later when I was working for Metropolitan and all. He had insurance with me and all. And
Well,
Joe
teachers were different back then. They kind of had to be, weren't they?
Teachers were like priests used to be. When priests said the Mass in Latin, there was something about them that set them apart from the everyday person. They had to know something different, and you thought maybe they were more godly because they could say all these masses and everything, but you didn't know what they were talking about.
And the teachers were a little more godly, too, because they had the knowledge?
Teachers had the knowledge, you know, because college graduates back in those days were scarce, especially down here, you know. The only people who went to college was a few doctors' sons, attorneys' sons, and things like that. The average worker back, especially in the Depression days, just actually a high school graduate was a little rare, because we were one of my brothers, one brother and sister, and Lee Adams, and Robert Freed. That's the only ones I can remember in this area that even graduated from high school until around the war.
No, it was tough just to get to high school and go all the way up to Gretna. Fisher didn't start till about, what, 41, 42, something like that?
Something like that, yeah. Because you see, we had to get up. A lot of people think, well, you're just telling all hard time stories, you see. But we got up in the morning, had cows to milk and all. And then we walked from here to the bridge, which was 1.5 miles. And I caught the bus there and rode that 15 miles to Gretna High School. And then come back in the evening, we had our chores to do and our work to do then. And I wasn't the best pupil in the world. Not that I was bad, but we had a teacher here at Rosethorn School that really wasn't qualified to teach. She was just known.
Let's not mention any names again,
No.
because it's probably family.
But anybody...
You're determined to get me in trouble,
No,
aren't you?
anybody that ever was in this area will know who I'm talking about.
Oh, dear, there goes the station.
But no kidding, George. When I went to high school, it was going with about a 4th or 5th grade education. Fractions, math, and English. All we knew how to do was talk and didn't know a noun from an adjective or a verb or anything.
Well, of course, you know,
It was like
high school graduates weren't that common then.
No.
My family, my parents didn't finish high school.
Now, you see, my little sister had no problem at all when she got to Gretna High, because this teacher that I had, when I graduated, she gave up too, and she was transferred down to Lafitte. And they sent Miss Henrietta Kreitz. She had been principal at Grand Island School, and she took over as principal at Rosethorn. And my little sister was fortunate enough to have her for 2 years, and she didn't have any problems.
Well, now, with Fisher and all like that, things have improved a lot, because you've got 4 children. They're all college graduates.
Everything down here has changed from one end to the other. We've got half of the teachers in school are local now. We used to have to import teachers down here. And well, there's even 2 or 3 pretty darn good doctors from the bayou. Dr. Trox's 2 sons. One's a retired colonel and a surgeon in the Army, Air Force, and he's retired now. He's in Victoria, Texas, or San Antonio. And then his son Billy is emergency room surgeon at Ashland Hospital, and we've got some doctors and lawyers. Miss Martin, who is Evelyn's sister-in-law, was taught for years. She was principal at Lafitte School Elementary, and she's an attorney now.
I was surprised when you were talking about some of your teachers that you named, you know, so many men. Because teaching used to be kind of the exclusive province of women at one time.
Until you got to high school. But then the
men
main,
were in the high schools.
The main lady, I almost messed up and didn't mention her, the greatest of them all, was Miss Agnes Cross. You may have known her.
Oh, I knew Miss Cross, yes.
Sweetest lady in the world.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about this area around here. Where'd you shop? Where'd you go for food and all like that?
Well, you raised most of your food, you caught most of your food. All you had to do, we had local groceries. We had a grocery store up the bayou. A Petrie store was formerly Terrebonne's, where you could get the rice and the salt and the sugar, stuff that you couldn't, flour, stuff that you had to have, you know. But we raised a garden. We could catch all the crabs and perch and fish off of the wharf. Our neighbors were fishermen and get shrimp and fish and all, and wild ducks and everything in the wintertime. You didn't really have to have anything but just a little rice and flour, and butchered our own meat, had all the salt meat. Wasn't such a thing as a lot of fresh meat because you didn't have the refrigeration,
right?
You know. But we'd butcher a hog or two every winter, and what we didn't give away was salted down. And you could always cook a pot of beans with the salt beans, you know.
When they cut the Intracoastal Canal through?
They cut, the first time they dredged it was in about 38 or 30, in the late 30s. And that's when they made that cut between Bayou Villas and La Rose, dug that new canal. And they came through with the big dipper dredge followed by a suction dredge. That's when they put all them big logs on the bank. The reason the logs were laying in the bottom of the bayou was because the old stern wheeler B.L. Watson that hauled all the logs to the Rathbone Lumber Company sawmill up in Harvey, they used to dog those logs together with two spikes and a chain connected to the chain, and they had a raft of logs maybe 500 or 600 feet long and 40 or 50 feet wide, and it was towed by this big old steamboat. And every once in a while you'd get what you call a sinker, a waterlogged one, and it would break loose and sink to the bottom of the bayou. And there were quite a few logs in the bottom of the bayou. And when they came through with that dipper dredge, they just cleaned all that out. And we got the logs that was piled in the front of our place.
Has the oil and gas business affected this area a lot?
It has affected it a hell of a lot. Some for the good, some for the bad. It's about 50-50 either way. It has...
Well, pick one half and tell me about it.
Well, it hasn't increased the erosion and all that are causing our wetlands to go away and all. But what it has done is opened up outlets for fishing and everything that you never had before. It's helped the sports fishermen and the other fishermen greatly because access to the good spots, because every time they dig a canal and move off, that was a great fishing spot for years and years, still is, you see. And now, years ago, we didn't have motorized boats. We had skiffs and all, and we couldn't. Only people who had the boats with the engines was the fishermen themselves. But as for us here, we couldn't go trawling or anything because to get a decent place for trawling was too far to go.
Right.
But now, since the oil company dug a canal up here, the Vendome Canal, it goes back and connects with little bays and bayous back in there. I didn't go this year because of my heart attack, but my wife and I take my little boat and leave here in the morning about 5:30. 15 minutes from here, we'd put our trawl over, make 2 20-minute drags, and be home for 8 o'clock with 50 pounds of shrimp, which we couldn't have done back in those days, you see. So in that way, it has helped. There's more shrimp further up into this area and all, and I guess it's because of the saltwater encroachment.
Is it getting crowded here with people?
Yes, too much so.
And I see that's kind of surprising because you drive around and it doesn't look crowded, but to
No.
somebody who grew up here, it probably
To grow up
is.
here, I remember when there was about 10 families between here and the old bridge, you know. And now you got, within eyesight, there's more than that. But it's changed gradually, some for the good, some for the bad. But if you was here when it was really country, wow, you can see the difference. But we're getting some good people moving in.
Let's talk a little history of the area. You want to bring the ladies on to do that?
That'd be good.
All right, one of the nice things about sitting out on the dock talking is that you can just call over to the neighbors and say, come on in. We figured that since, you know, this flatlander foreigner, you know, from
Actually, I
Florida
am
and
a
Mississippi
transplant.
was here telling all these lies, we'd get somebody on who knew something about
Yeah,
the area. So
I'm a
we could bring you
misplaced
on.
Californian, so
Oh, Lord, what am I doing here?
I mean, Leona, you
I've been here
I
long
come
enough to
from
be
a
a native.
good place, Bayou Lafitte.
Yeah.
All right, Bayou Lafitte.
That's the
Finally,
thing.
we found a native.
Yeah,
We got people from Mississippi, from California. Finally, we got somebody who grew up here.
we're here long enough to be a native.
How long's long enough?
Since 1929.
Oh, heck, I guess
I
that
grew
counts.
up here.
60 years, well, I guess we can make an
Yeah,
exception.
I'm a native.
Not everybody is fortunate enough to be born in the Crown
That's
Point, Lafitte
right.
area of
That's
South Louisiana. You know,
That's right.
it's just a special few who are from South
Yeah,
Louisiana.
that's right.
What brought you here in 1929?
Well, I was 17 in the Depression, and my parents moved here. My sister was married to a Fleming, and I guess just my thoughts after I've grown up, why we came here, I guess the Depression brought two families together to trying to make ends meet.
Now, you mentioned a name that I want to follow up on, the Fleming. Mr. Lee referred earlier to the Fleming Plantation. And one reason we came down here, well, there are two reasons we came down here. One is that we started a few years ago trying to do little histories of all the communities in Jefferson Parish, and Lafitte's one of the oldest. And also, too, because we came across this wonderful little book that was put together by Miss Evelyn Hebert and Miss Maureen Theriault, and the students at Jean Lafitte Elementary, if memory serves me correctly, called Bayous, which is kind of a history of Lafitte. We knew this was a place worth talking about, and the Fleming Plantations mentioned in there. Tell me about the Fleming Plantation.
Oh my goodness.
That's a long
We've got an
story.
hour or two.
Oh,
you know,
yes.
sure.
Grandpa Fleming they were from Minnesota. In fact, all the Flemings live in Minnesota except me.
Wait a minute. We got the Fleming Plantation, people from Minnesota?
All right. Now he's the
I'm
one
leaving.
that Grandpa Fleming, Calvin Fleming, bought the plantation in 1910. But he came down in a boat. He was a surveyor, and he came down in a boat. There's no highway or anything down here. And he bought the plantation. I think there was 10,000 acres or close to it in what he bought. And then he had 4 children. And they gradually came to Louisiana. And I have a paper with it has the history of the plantation.
Well, tell
The
me a little
owners
bit
of it. So he didn't raise anything on the plantation like corn or rice or anything, but it had been at one time been a rice plantation.
Who owned it originally?
Well, there's several owners.
Originally, it was a Berkeley plantation.
No, it wasn't original.
Original?
No.
Yeah, straighten out this man. He's from
Yeah.
Mississippi. He doesn't-
Okay.
Of course, you're from California.
No. But I have this. It goes back to 1760.
Oh, now that was before my time.
Now that sounds like history.
No, I didn't
It
remember
sounds
that.
like. And
Well, you
there
were
was,
here then, weren't you?
No, not quite.
and the original grant, there was approximately 12,000 acres. I'm just reading this off this here. In 1760 to a Claude Villers who bought it. And it passed through several hands. In 1760, and then it was sold again in 1812. And then it goes on in 1824, and it kept passing through different hands until finally.
Didn't Mr.
Grandpa-
Jones own it before
No.
the...
No,
Calvin Fleming
No.
told me it did.
no. It was called Mavis Grove Plantation, is what it was called. And it was Harold Black sold the Mavis Plantation to a Barataria Land and Rice Company in 1904. And now wait, now there, Howard. Here's where it comes with Thorn. Howard Black, after note and mortgage complications, sold Mavis Grove Plantation and his 12,000 arpents to Virginia Thorn.
Mm-hmm. That was Mr. Jones's husband.
Hmm?
I mean, Mrs. Jones was, husband was, she was married to Paul Jones.
Is this where we get the Rose Thorn, as in
Right.
the Rose Thorn
She's the
school?
wife.
Yes,
You see, at the time we moved here, Paul Jones owned all this land from the Fleming Plantation up this way. And he subdivided it and all and sold this area. And he set aside the place down there where the Rose Thorn Recreational Center is for a park specifically, and that was back in 1920. And he sold all the rest of this land, and that's when we moved here. And then he owned a lot of the land on the Alborn Road, and his home was down there.
Those were different plantations. This was a different plantation.
Yeah, this was different, but that track and this track, and then Calvin had told me that originally the Fleming Plantation had belonged to them too, before they got it.
Yeah, when you start getting back into family history, it can get real.
Oh yeah, you can get.
Oh yeah, it can.
Yeah,
But I
there's so much.
I wouldn't
This
really
I
know.
don't think we can get too much history out of this, except in the dates when it
Yeah.
did. But I
Just
know
like
that
Lafitte
Calvin
is named after
Fleming-
the pirate.
Do you
Huh?
believe that?
Yeah.
What?
What's his connection with the area?
Well, during his heyday and all, he had his place where he operated from out on across from Grand Island.
Barataria Bay?
Yeah. Shanae?
That's the island, Belterre,
Yeah.
across where Fort Livingston is. That's where he operated from, and most of his people who sailed those boats and all with him, they migrated up and through it, and he brought his ill-gotten goods through and up here to Bayou Coquille, and the people used to come in wagons from New Orleans to buy and
John
trade
Lafitte
stuff.
pass up this bayou?
Not this bayou.
Not this one?
No, but they've come through Lake Salvador and through Bayou Coquille to where right now where the Jean Lafitte National Park is.
Yeah.
At least that's what history says.
They
And,
have dug up a lot of
yeah.
history out of Lake Salvador.
Yeah, and you like the mound where the cemetery is down there. They've
That's
the
an Indian.
archaeologist has excavated that and dated it back to the Indian mounds
Well,
300
it's
or 400
an Indian
years
burial.
ago. Yeah, it actually was an Indian burial ground.
People around here, do they think Jean Lafitte was a pirate, a smuggler, or a patriot?
Well, all my
He was
life
a little
I
bit of
thought
everything.
all my life I thought he was just a pirate and a cutthroat. And then I saw the Buccaneer made with Frederick March and all back in the 30s, and I found out he was a hero. You know, so
Well, he helped save New Orleans,
evidently
so he had
did.
to
Or
have a
it
little
made a good
heroism.
story anyway.
I guess so.
But like anybody else, George, they have some good points, even me, you know. So they claim he did help win the war that was fought years after the treaty was signed.
Is he important to people around here?
I don't think so. They,
Not really.
in fact, half of the people here, if you mentioned his name, probably wouldn't know who he was.
Oh, I
Yeah.
doubt that, seriously.
But
So that's
the
the
town of
generation.
Lafitte was
The
was
younger
named
generation?
after him.
They don't. It would be the older generation that would
The real
remember
old
that.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, this man claims to speak some French, but you know, having been born in Bayou Lafourche, surely you've got to be a
Yes.
French speaker.
Yes, I am.
All right. Tell me about the French culture in this area.
She's on bayou Lafitte.
I went by Lafitte.
Well, that's all right.
So I was raised by a family named Charpentiers, and my father used to have a farm, and I used to go out and help him with the farm. I used to plant potatoes, onions, and I also pick cotton. Then I'd come home in the evening, help my mother with the kitchen. We'd make bread and help her to cook.
What kind of school did you go to in Bayou Lafitte?
Public school.
Yeah, but I mean, describe it. What was it like?
Well, it was in La Rose, and they had up to the 12th grade, and you graduated from there. But I didn't.
Really? That's different from here. You just had, what, like one-room elementary schools?
We started off
On
in
the
a
bayou.
one-room elementary,
That's right.
went to 7th grade,
Yeah.
and then from there on you had to go to high school. But in those days, when you made
Your school,
most of them, when they got 5th grade, they had enough education.
Yeah.
I left Bayou Lafitte in 1928, and I moved over here to Lafitte, and I married in 1930.
Tell me about growing up as a young girl. We heard what he did. He swatted mosquitoes and cut school to go fishing. As a girl growing up in the area.
Well, when I was a young girl, my mother didn't allow us to go to dances or anything like that.
Unless you were chaperoned.
Yes, and I never had that much of a chance to do that either. And we had our chores to do. We'd get up in the morning, and I have to help my mother with the breakfast with the children, and we'd go on to school. And we'd come back from school in the afternoon, it was back to work again. So we really never had too much of going out or
There was
anything.
very
Only
little
thing was
social life.
special was when some of our family would get married. Well, that was 2-day wedding, and we used to enjoy that. You know, the country weddings?
Uh-huh.
We used to love that. And that's the time we had a chance to get out.
All of the celebrations were like
Yes.
births, funerals,
Yes,
weddings,
yeah.
that kind of thing.
You get to
That's
meet
it.
everybody at a
Yeah.
funeral or wedding.
And my mother would say, this is Aunt so-and-so and so-and-so. Until today, I don't remember who they were. There were so many of them. Yeah, I had a nice, wonderful childhood.
Tell me something. Is Lafitte a city? Do you have a mayor? And-
We have just in the last few years incorporated a part of it, and it's Jean Lafitte, city of Jean Lafitte. We have a mayor and a board of aldermen and a constable.
What was the government like before that? What did you have?
Everything was Gretna. Everything was governed by the county seat in Gretna.
it still more or less is.
It is, yeah.
I
We
sti-
we were the poor relatives. The only time they knew us was when it got close to election time. They'd haul shells in our yard and everything else, and
You're out to get me in
Tell
trouble
you who to
again, Mr.
vote
Lee? Well, what about, was there a judge that came around, sheriff? What kind of
We had
police?
a
Or was
judge-
there much crime?
we had to. No, we didn't have
no,
no
we
crime.
still don't have.
We still don't have the crime
We still-
problems here.
we
We
s-
don't lock our doors or don't. park
Well,
our
I lock
cars
my
and-
door. There's just too many transits now, but
But a little theft once in a while, a little thing like that. But you knew who did it.
but we never have had a problem though. See, sometimes they'll come down in the bayou. They come in from the bayou side once in a blue moon. But I think we're very fortunate with the number of people that's down here.
When growing up in a similar area back during Prohibition, my dad, who was a fisherman as a young man, had some stories about occasionally a boat with some rum or
Oh,
something
well, now,
would come
yes,
through.
I can, yeah.
I can
Yes,
remember.
I can-
Everybody's eyes
I
light
can-
up when I talk about that.
I can remember as a kid the big two-masted sailing boat coming up, and right down there where you see that boat, they'd land. I'm not going to mention any names,
There we
but
go.
they'd work all night unloading that bonded whiskey to come in from Cuba,
They-
and then some of the boys in the neighborhood would make $15 to $20 a night, which was a fortune. Mother would never let us do it because it was against the law. Scared we'd get caught,
They'd come into the swamp down by the tavern, by the Goose Bayou, with those boats.
In the old tradition of Jean Lafitte.
Right, and they'd come in and they'd unload that in the dark and unload it ashore and stash it until they could get rid of it. But then there was a lot of, what they call it? Rum running?
Oh,
Yeah,
rum
rum running. And a lot of times
wasn't
before they
rum.
could get it to
Right.
New Orleans, another bunch would hijack them up at bayou Coquille
Yes.
and shoot a couple of them and run off with the load of
Now,
stuff.
that's just sounding like a livelier place than you led me to believe it was.
But
Oh, it was lively down here.
it happened. It really happened.
Oh, yeah.
But I'd say it wasn't a common thing like the dope and all of that is today.
What do you mean in terms of use?
That's right.
People using?
Yeah. In other words, it was brought in through here, but very few of the people here used it. Because you had federal agents come around here, and even if you made a little homemade wine, if you saw a stranger on the road, you'd go hide your wine.
Well, they made homebrew down here a
Yeah.
lot.
Well, I've got to admit that we did that in New
Yeah.
Orleans when I was young, too.
Right.
So.
I had an old grandmother, she made her own homebrew. She drank a bottle of homebrew every night before she went to bed.
But good for the circulation. What about during World War II? Did that, I mean, I know
I
you
can't
spent
say
6
because
years
I
in the
wasn't
Navy.
here.
But living here during World War II, did that affect you?
Yes, it did.
How?
Well, my husband used to have this, the parish had put a little building for, what did you call that little house?
That was,
Selective service.
Selective service. And then we had to have somebody in there 24 hours.
no, it was for, well, there are watchers of what
Oh, the
they
air
were.
raid war?
Air
Air
raid.
raid. Yeah.
Civilian defense.
Civilian.
Yeah,
And
I was in that.
we had clerks, and every once in a while one of them would leave us. So we had it pretty hard then. And I used to go to bed very late because I had to take all the stamps and all the stuff and put that in books and everything, you know.
Oh, you had a store?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the name of the store?
Fleming Canal store.
Oh, yeah, okay. I meant to ask about that earlier. Well, we were talking about
Yeah.
stores, and since he didn't want to give you any credit for anything, he said there weren't any stores.
You could get anything from penicillin to open heart surgery at that store.
No, but I'll tell you something
me about it.
that happened years ago. I'm going back about 50 years ago. The store used to be on Fleming Canal on the main highway, and we had an epidemic of diarrhea. And the nurses and one of the doctors from up front used one of our room in the store, and they opened up a clinic there. And the children would come there and they'd give them the parents, they would give them a bag of what did I say that was?
Penicillin.
No,
Oh.
barley. And you had to boil the barley
Barley.
and let them drink the water. And that's how they were cured from that. But that lasted over a week.
In the store we were talking about, in the absence of a government seat, then I suppose the store was kind of a center of the community.
It was.
Where a lot of business was
Yes.
transacted.
My husband used to buy, when we first got married, we used to buy wood. Because at that time it was during the Depression. So every little bit helped. And we used to buy moss. And then when we moved where we are now at the bayou, my husband bought furs, alligators, soft crabs, hard crabs, little bitty turtles. Anything that would help, he used to buy.
Did people start kind of congregating and
Yes.
living around the
Oh,
store?
yes.
And
That was, get
Yeah.
all the news
That was
from
a
the whole
must.
bayou there.
Yes, indeed.
Because just about everybody at one time or another from anywhere on the bayou came to Fleming Canals.
We used to open up in the morning at 5 o'clock and close at 8 o'clock. And sometimes you heard a little knock on the side. Can we get something, you know, and I had to open the store for him.
I'm not really sure of the location we're talking about. Would that be kind of like in what's now the city of Lafitte, or where was the store?
That part isn't included in the city.
Sure it is.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, we are.
right from the road by your house.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm in that now.
You are now in it?
Or you are too, part of this.
Oh, I know I am, but I was
Okay,
unfortunate.
At least they say I am. I don't say I am.
Tell me some more about the store.
Well,
Was it in your husband's family? Did he start?
no. He bought it through Mr. Bob Barrett. And that store used to be on the Temple, out in the lake somewhere, so.
Yes.
Temple?
Who's that?
Mr. Bob Barrett.
yes.
Yeah, he came from out that way.
Yeah, and this is my husband.
He
bought it from
started
him.
the store.
He was
And
part
that's how,
Indian.
that's how we started it. It's 1930.
But I said the store used to be somewhere else.
It used to be on the main highway,
Oh.
close to Fleming. It's a little,
There's a little ditch there
canal
that's
there.
called Fleming Canal.
It is a canal.
Yeah.
It's
and
not
that's
a
why we
ditch.
named
Yeah.
it Fleming Canal Store. So when we move it where we are now, we kept it. We kept the name
Oh,
on it.
so
you
the
see.
original store was
Yeah.
on the canal, and when you
Yeah.
built the new one, you kept the...
No, we moved that one.
No, they moved
You moved the whole
They
store?
rolled the
Rolled
thing down the
everything.
road
And
and
then
moved
added
it to the
on.
bayou.
Yeah. And we
You just picked
added
it up and put it on
Yeah.
a truck and
On
moved it?
rollers.
That's right.
I see.
And because you see, at that time, George, the main part of the trade, the business, all was conducted with the fishermen and the boats and the oil fields. And so back on the highway, they were left out of that. So by moving the store down to the bayou, they could put the oil pumps up and the fishermen could come there, and oil companies and everything else. All the business was transacted there. And it was one heck of a place.
Well, it's kind of as the store, you were probably, to some extent, the doctor for the area, too. What was it like getting medical
I'll
care?
tell you this. We were very fortunate. We had one telephone at my house, that covered the whole neighborhood. And we had one car. And every time somebody got sick, they'd run to the store, borrow the car, or one of us would drive them in. And when they used the phone, it was the same thing. I delivered messages all day long. And during the war, I had several death messages I had to deliver. And a lot of wounded, you know. That was a part of
People
it.
from the area who'd gone
Yes.
off in the
Oh, yes.
services and been
That's
killed or injured.
Yeah. Yeah, we did a lot of that.
Was there a lot of, home remedies, people doctoring
Oh, yeah.
themselves?
Lots.
90% of it.
Tell me about it.
We had an old man down the road here, Grandpa Fustan Capel. And I remember when I was a kid, my father had a bad case of erysipelas, an infection. And back in those days, a lot of times it was fatal. And we didn't have any doctors down here then. Dr. St. Louis came later, but at that time there was no doctors. And this old man, he treated my father's leg with, I don't know whether it was cornstarch or flour. He made a little paste, and I remember. And he'd dip his hand in that paste, and he'd made a circle around it, and it was about that big around, fiery red. And he'd go around it, and then he'd make a cross, and prayed, mumbled, a bunch of prayers. And within a few days,
That's faith healing.
within a few days, he was up and walking.
They still have some down here.
And this is something I know.
So there's some faith
Oh yeah,
thing?
you still have treaters. Yeah.
Still have
Well,
what?
treaters they
Oh,
call
treaters.
it. Treaters.
That's right.
And behind a lot of their treatments and all was some very good logic. I remember Mr. Benoit Otan was a treater, and he was showing me some of the things that he treated earache with, oil from the glands of an alligator. See? Now, doctors and all prescribe warm olive oil, sweet oil they call it, in the ear for ear infection. And this old man used the alligator, rendered out the glands oil. That was the greasiest damn stuff you ever saw in your life. And the logic was just like the olive oil, it was pure and it relieved the earache,
Well, I can remember when I was young, like if you stuck a nail in your foot, take turpentine and some kind of fat. And,
Yeah.
It's a salt meat.
Side meat,
salt meat.
and it'd draw that
Yeah,
poison out.
That's right.
And
there was such
when
a
I
thing
got to
as
college and got educated,
kerosene and octagon soap
I was
and
told that
everything
that had
else.
no scientific validity. The only thing that ever puzzled me was that it always cured it.
That's right.
It would
right.
But you
draw
know,
the
George,
poison out.
some of the best medicines we have today comes from the rainforest and some of the medicine men and all from South America in the jungles. They have some of the, like, isn't it digitalis? Is from a plant that they treat heart trouble with and all.
Well, the Indians used to chew some leaf, I forget the name of it now, and when the white settlers came in, they said, you know, that's ridiculous, but it turns out that what was in the leaf was the same thing that's in aspirin.
Right.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the folk remedies really are good science when you get right down to it.
Well, you can take the bark from an ash tree, and that's the bitterest stuff. It's worse than quinine. And I imagine it probably has some curative values. It'll cure you going around chewing any more of it, I'll tell you that.
I can remember when my little brothers were very young, and they had fever. And my mother used to take elderly leave and rub their head with it.
Yeah.
And do you know, when the leaf would get hot, Mama would say, that's breaking the fever. And it broke the fever. Now, you believe in it, you know, that was our remedy.
Who was the first doctor down in the area?
The first good doctor we had was Dr. Troxel. And with the exception of during the war and all, he was our doctor, and one of the greatest. He's retired now. He's going to let us all die. But he's really a great doctor.
But he lived down here.
He's still down
with his
there.
family.
But he's a fisherman now. He's not. He fishes and makes a garden.
Everybody fishes down there.
Yeah.
What about for church? Yeah.
Well,
And we've touched on the body. We've got to talk about the soul a little
sure.
bit here.
I was a heathen.
They had a church across the bayou, by Barataria, and we used to have to cross in
Now
skiffs.
this was years ago.
I'm going back over 50 years.
Yeah.
We had to cross in skiffs. And if you wasn't there when the last skiff left, you didn't go to church.
Not on this side.
You know,
Was there a
Visiting
It was a
priest.
Catholic.
I was going to ask,
Yeah,
was a
that's
visiting
true.
priest or
Yeah.
what? Yeah. So there was nobody in the area. They would just come in every week or every other week or something,
well,
say mass?
every weekend.
Every
Every
weekend.
other week. When I first came on the bayou, sometimes
Yeah.
once a month.
Yeah.
That was Father Wester.
Father Wester was about
Yeah.
the first, wasn't he?
He's the one
Yeah.
that married me, so it was
Yeah.
Father Wester. And that was
And-
once a month.
Now, as we're taping this, we're a couple of weeks away from All Saints' Day, and I'm told there's something special about All Saints' Day down here. Tell me about that tradition.
It's a tradition in the bayou that on All Saints' Night, for a week or two before, they whitewash all the tombs and get the cemetery all looking spick and span and beautiful. And then All Saints' Night, they burn the candles in the cemetery. They line those graves with candles
Make
all around, and the whole cemetery is just lit up with
Beautiful.
candles. And then the priest comes and blesses the cemetery and each grave.
The next day.
Was at night.
It used to be at night.
It used to
Yeah,
be.
but they don't.
These
Now
later,
they
later
used to do
priests
this in
scared
New
the
Orleans
dog to
too.
come
This
in.
was I think this is the only place where they still light the candles on there.
Yeah, well, I was going to say,
Yeah.
whitewashing the tombs
Yeah,
and
they-
cleaning up the cemetery is still a
it's-
tradition in New
Yeah.
Orleans, but I've
Right.
never heard of lighting
All
the
right, but
candles.
this
light
is the
the
only
candles.
place I think that is left that they burn their
still do.
candles on
Yeah.
the cemetery and
And
graves.
it's pretty to go on that night, visit all the different cemeteries, and sometimes you'll find one that's maybe 2 graves or 3 graves, like on the other side of my little
Yeah.
village, you know. But those 2 little graves will be cleaned up and nice, and the candles are burning by them. And we used to get in the car and just go visit each one of the cemeteries at night to see how pretty it was. And I think that's only here on the bayou that they do
Yeah.
that.
I don't know the
Now the
name of place.
Fleming Cemetery
Do they
is
still do it?
built
Because I haven't been in a
on
few
a
years.
Indian mound.
We got a cemetery built on an old Indian one?
Yeah.
Yeah,
uh-huh.
at the Fleming.
That's on the plantation, the
visited.
Fleming plantation.
See,
And up on the
if you
top of
visit
this
that.
hill, there's 2 graves, and they were the 2 Berthoud brothers that owned the plantation. And they're buried on that hill. They were both bachelors. And at the foot of that hill, there's a little stone, just a small stone that stands up maybe 2 feet. And on that stone it says, here lies little Oscar, stricken by the hand of Almighty God. And that stone would always be down, never would stand up. And some of my family they'd go up there to the cemetery and they'd stick that stone back up. And the history of it was that was a son of one of the Berthoud brothers and mothered by a slave. And there's no name on it, no date or anything. That's all it says on that slab. It's standing now. They finally got it so it stands up, but it never would stand.
I suppose it never really occurred to me that there were probably some areas with slaves in this region, or there were.
I have a
else.
picture. I have a picture with some slave house on it. I think my brother-in-law's house, Albert Fleming, the youngest son of the owner of the plantation, he moved an old slave house up on the sugar refinery, foundations of the sugar refinery that was stood down there.
This was on the plantation.
This
they had
is
their own
on, it's
sugar
still
refinery?
there. Yeah, there was a sugar
The brick
refinery
chimney
because
still stands.
it's one of the chimneys are still standing. But he moved that up on the foundations, brick foundations, and it's a double brick floor, and it's still standing there. And he added on to that house, added a porch all around it, built an upstairs, and it made a big house of it. But the original body of it is an old plantation house.
Were there that many plantations here? It wouldn't seem that
No.
this area would be good for growing.
No,
of-
Well, that's what
they
happened.
raised, you can go down at the Fleming plantation now, you can go across from where the houses are, and there's still ridges where the rice
Where the forest
paddies was. And they raised rice and they raised sugar cane on the plantation. That was what they raised on the plantation then.
But you see, when the system of levees was so hard to maintain in this country because everything kept settling. Like where the pen is at the back of Lafitte and all at one time, that was a big place. Carpetbaggers came down here after the Civil War and all, and they were going to make a fortune growing stuff. But what happened, the crawfish ate the levees, holes in the levees, and everything flooded.
Good for those
Well, it
carpetbaggers.
still don't flood there on the plantation
No, not
where
the high
they
ground next,
grew.
but way to the back where those canals and drainage ditches are, they all went underwater.
I mentioned flooding makes me think of, hurricanes, and not too far down from here was one of the most devastating, which is how Westwego got settled, according to one story, and how you ended up with the wife, and that's the Chenier Caminada
The Grand
Grand Chenier hurricane.
Yeah.
That's in the last century or the early part of this
Early
century?
part of
Early
this
part.
century.
Early part of this century.
I think it was,
Was it-
what, 1912, 14, something like 15?
I know they had one in 1915.
No, I think it was
But that was before that.
1915. Was?
I
Well,
think so.
1915 is when they had the real bad storm.
Because then a lot of
I
the
think that
people
was
from
the
that
one.
area moved to this area.
But here, relatively speaking, I mean, you're fairly safe from hurricanes. because
Not
you're not-
really.
anymore.
No?
Hurricane 1 2 years ago,
Oh, right, yeah.
had water this deep here. Right to the bottom of my house.
Right.
Motorboats come up, right on through the yard, down the road. Yeah. We were about 4 or 5 days with water right at the bottom of our house.
Yeah, I'm up on 3 blocks, and mine was right.
Yeah, right
happened
level.
at the-
Another 6 inches, and that would have been it. Would have been. Now the house
'cause
across
they
the
brought a
road,
boat in my yard and
it
got
had
me.
it had a lot of water in it.
Is flooding a traditional problem down here?
No,
No.
it never has been really.
That was the first time
The
we
first
ever had a
time
flood that I can
that
remember.
high.
I can remember, I wasn't here, but I do remember when Calvin was born in 1926.
One good
The
friend.
They
crevasse.
had a crevasse.
The
Yeah,
crevasse of Myrtle Grove.
yeah. And this was all underwater because Georgie said she waded up to her hips in water.
Got a bad
That was on a
spanking
Good
that
Friday.
You got a bad spanking
Playing
the
in
day
that
of the
water
crevasse?
against Mama's wishes.
Yeah. But we don't have much water.
No.
Down at Lower Lafitte, way down. they do.
But the problem is now they've dug a ship channel from Grand Island into Barataria, you know, and to accommodate the heavy equipment and all. And now when you get a high tide at Grand Island, it comes all the way up here. We didn't ever get a rising and falling tide here back in those days because it was such a shallow, winding system of waterways. Before it ever got this way, it was already going down on the other end, and it didn't affect us.
We've joined the 20th century.
It comes,
Unfortunately.
it's almost
Yes.
like flushing a toilet. When they do it there, boom, here it comes.